And if you have your Bibles, open them to 1 Samuel chapter 24. And once again, I apologize to our Hispanic brothers and sisters that Louise isn't here and you have to put up with my bad Southern English. So next week we'll get back. And also next week, just give you a little teaser. Next week, I have a special announcement to make about our Homeless Alliance, something that's been going on behind the scenes for a couple of years, and it's about to go public, and I want you to hear it from me first before it goes public. And so it's a big announcement. It's good news, but now you got to wait till next week to hear. So come back for that special. It'll be the sermon. I mean, I got a lot to talk about. So, well, now you got to wait till next week, but we'll just leave it at that. Also, unfortunately, there's another execution coming up, and it's scheduled for Thursday, May 21st. And it's been our tradition to have a March for Mercy on the Sunday before that Thursday. But this particular one, we're not going to be able to do that for various reasons. Partly, that's Misty and I's anniversary weekend, and I'll be out of town. And Dan Mann, who co-leads that with me, will also be out of town. And then there's just some things we have to figure out about next steps when it comes to the march and how we support one another. And so Dan has talked to the guys on Unit 2 and told them about that, and they're okay with it and support our decision to get behind. Stacy Rector is a minister's name in Nashville who runs Tennessee for the Tennesseans for an alternative to the death penalty. And there's been kind of two tracks where we've done something and Stacy has done something, but we're trying to bring everybody together. And so we're going to follow her lead on this particular execution. So watch, there may be some vigils during the week. There will be a vigil on the 21st out at Riverbend during the execution. And some of you have gone to that, and I'm usually helping run that. And so you'll hear some more information about that on the Thursday, the 21st. I think it's at 10 a.m. I don't think it's any different this time. And so if you want to come to that vigil and pray while an execution is taking place inside, let me know, and we'll get you hooked up for that. Remember the guys on death row, because starting the 21st, there's 4 executions this year. 1 in May, 1 in August, 1 in September, and then 1 in December. Tony Carruthers is the one scheduled for May, and I know Tony, we haven't talked a whole lot, but I have talked to him on occasion, mainly just small talk, and we're praying for clemency. There seems to be some good evidence that he is innocent of the crime itself, but then also he has a severe disability problem. He represented himself at the original trial, so had no lawyer, and hasn't really received a chance to appeal or to hear things. And so remember the victims' families who are struggling, and all this will be brought up over the next month. But and pray for an end to the death penalty. That's the only way I think justice can really be done. But with that in mind, how to deal with difficult people. How to deal with difficult people. Now, how many of you have at least one difficult person in your life? Right? Just a couple. I'm really surprised. Well, the rest of you are blessed. Maybe you didn't raise your hand because that difficult person may be sitting at the table with you, and you don't want to, get anything started here on a Sunday morning. But obviously, all of us have difficult people in our lives. It could be somebody at work. It could be somebody at home, or at least in our family, or in the neighborhood, or just somebody maybe we went to school with and they're still around. And think of that person who, if you see them in the grocery store, you walk down the other aisle and try to avoid them because you just don't want to talk to them, or you're afraid of another confrontation because of unhealed wounds in the past. But all of us have difficult people in our lives. Now, the Bible tells us to love our enemies. In fact, that's really the key distinction between a follower of Jesus and any other type of religion. Not just love, but enemy love. The Bible, Jesus is the only teacher who really said to us, love your enemies. And so so the Bible tells us to love your enemies, but I'm not necessarily talking about that this morning. I'm talking about those type of people who, they're not your enemy. I mean, you may even love them. So they're not really your enemies, but they're just difficult to be around. That's who I'm talking about this morning. Now, if you got the handout with the outline on it, you see this cartoon that I'm going to put up here that basically says there's 6 types of difficult people. And you may have one or all of these 6 in your life or had them at one point or another. And so just kind of look at that and I'll talk about it very, very quickly. But 6 types of difficult people. First are the know-it-alls. This difficult person is arrogant. They have an opinion about everything, and they're going to tell you their opinion about everything. And they're not just telling you their opinion. They're trying to convince you that their opinion is the only opinion. They know it all. They have the answer to everything, and they get defensive when they are proven wrong. Sometimes they get defensive even though you're trying to prove them right. They still get defensive if they feel challenged. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but just think about if you have a know-it-all in your life, it's just, again, it could be somebody close to you or it just could be somebody you avoid, but the know-it-alls. The second type of difficult person is the passives. This person, they just never offer any ideas. You know, it's the type of person who you say, hey, let's go get something to eat. Okay, where do you want to go? And they say, well, I don't care, wherever you want to go. Okay, let's go here. No, I don't want to go there. Well, then tell me where you want to go. Right? They're just passive and they never make a commitment. You never really know where they stand, and they refuse to commit to anything. They're just passive. And sometimes that leads to being passive aggressive. Third type of difficult person is the dictators. The dictators, they just bully and intimidate. They are constantly demanding something of you. And if you don't do it, then they criticize you even more, and they're just brutally critical about everything. A fourth type of difficult person would be the yes people. These are the people who, unlike the passives, these people agree to any commitment that you ask them for, but they rarely deliver on their commitment. You ask them to do something, they say they're going to do it, but you know they're not going to do it, so you got to have a plan B. Because it happens over and over. They can't be trusted to follow through, even though they say they're going to do something. And then when the job's done, they'll try to take credit for that job when it gets done. A fifth type of difficult person is the no person. And this is the person who's quick to point out that something will not work. They're not going to offer any suggestions, but they'll just tell you that what you want to do is not going to work, and they'll give you a list of why it won't work. These type of people are inflexible. And they will not do anything so that they can't be blamed for anything. And then finally, there are the gripers. Nothing is ever right with them. Maybe one reason you avoid them is because you know all they're going to do is complain about something, and you know you don't have time to listen to another complaint. They prefer complaining over finding solutions, and they are not happy until everyone around them is unhappy. You know anybody like that? So let's face it, difficult people exist in our lives, and they're not going to go anywhere. However, there are some things that we can do to make living with difficult people a little less difficult. And there's a story in the Bible that I think we can glean some principles from to live with difficult people. Now, the story is about Saul and David, King Saul and David. And anyone who knows the Bible knows that Saul and David had a difficult relationship with one another. Extremely difficult, maybe more difficult than any relationship that you have with people. At least I hope you don't have one this bad, where if somebody really wants to kill you, and they've tried several times to kill you. But the difficulty that David and Saul had really stemmed from Saul's jealousy toward David. That's really where it came from. Now, often, not all the time, but often the difficult people in your life are difficult because they're jealous. They might not just be jealous of you, they could be jealous of everybody. That would be like a seventh problem person where they're just jealous of everybody. But they could be jealous of you because of what they perceive you, or maybe there's a success, or maybe they think you have it all together and they don't, or everything seems to be going well for you but not them. And so they become jealous. And so Saul was extremely jealous of David. One of the reasons he was so jealous, and you see this in 1 Samuel chapter 16, where at the beginning of the chapter 16 and at the end of chapter 16, we are told, and it's a story where God rejects Saul as king and he anoints David. And so, in a sense, the people also rejected Saul, and then they look to David. And so Saul becomes jealous because he knows that God has anointed David to really take his place. And so he becomes jealous. But in spite of all of that, David faithfully served King Saul as his musician. And even though at times Saul would unleash on him and try to get rid of him, David remained faithful to him as his musician. And the Bible says that when this anger would come over Saul, or apparently he was prone to depression, that they would call in David, and David would play his musical instruments, and it would just ease Saul's soul for a moment. But David faithfully served King Saul, and then in 1 Samuel chapter 17, things take a really big turn in their relationship. And that's when David defeats Goliath. And the story of David and Goliath. And so Saul is being defeated by the Palestinians, or the Philistines rather, and they send this giant to basically, the way some warfare would work would be, send us your best soldier, we'll send you our best soldier. And instead of us killing each other, let these two fight to the death, and whoever survives, then the army, that side wins. And so David, nobody in the army can do anything. David's just a young shepherd. He goes to take food to his brothers who are fighting on the front line. He sees what is going on, and he volunteers himself to go and to take on Goliath. And you know the story. He picked up 5 stones. And some people say the reason he picked up 5 stones is because Goliath had 4 brothers who were as big as he was. And David takes the stone. He's an expert with his slingshot because that's how he protects the sheep. And he hits Goliath in the head, and he kills Goliath, then he cuts his head off. And so the war is over, and the Israelites have won that war. And you would think Saul would be happy about that. But look what happens in 1 Samuel chapter 18. 1 Samuel chapter 18. In verse 5, we read these words. Whatever Saul sent him to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. Of course, one of the things he did was defeat Goliath, but anything David did was successful. This pleased all the people and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with tambourines and lutes. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Saul is good, but David is better. Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. Be careful of leaders who like to count attendance and people and who likes them and who doesn't like them. Just a side note. You know, a leader who wants to compare audience sizes to other, just be careful. Saul says, what more can he get but the kingdom? And look at verse 9. And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Now, here's a lesson. Here's a lesson from all this so far. The lesson is this. There is a reason difficult people are difficult. And for Saul, it was jealousy. But in your life, it could be a number of things. There's a reason difficult people are difficult. It could be because they've been rejected at some point in their life over something, and maybe somehow or another they blame you for that rejection. But just the fact that they were rejection, or they've been humiliated, or maybe they had a difficult upbringing of one kind or another, or maybe they've had failures in this life or perceived failures, and maybe they've had deep loss, and so there's deep feelings of grief. Or maybe at some point in their life they have felt overlooked, and as a result, they have a low self-esteem of themselves, don't think anybody cares for them and all. But the whole point of all of this, there's a reason difficult people are difficult. More than likely, it's not your fault. Sometimes people are difficult. Well, what did I ever do to them? Why are they so mad at me? Well, you may not have done anything. This is a famous saying, and I think it applies here. Hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. Saul's jealousy towards David led Saul to try and kill David on several different occasions. And as a result, David has to go into hiding. And that's what's going on in chapter 24, where this story I want to refer to is found. David is in hiding. And from these events in 1 Samuel 24, I think we can learn 6 lessons to deal with the difficult people in our lives. Again, more than likely, that difficult person in your life doesn't want to kill you, at least physically. But difficult people can harm us with their words and with their actions, and so we have to learn how to deal with them. So let's read. 1 Samuel chapter 24. Verse 1. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all of Israel and set out to look for David. This is a side note. David had 40 men with him. So 3,000 against 40. They set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats, just a location in the wilderness. Verse 3. Saul came to the sheep pens. Along the way, a cave was there. And this is the NIV, but it's kind of funny. And Saul went in the cave to relieve himself. Saul had to go to the bathroom. Aren't you glad the Bible put that in there? You know? I mean, I don't know anybody who has a life verse that says, I stopped by a cave and had to go to the bathroom. Right? But Saul came by this cave. He decided to go into the bathroom to relieve himself because, there were no truck stops. There was no indoor plumbing, just a cave. Now, David and his men were far back in the cave. Are you getting the picture? David is in hiding. He probably hears Saul coming, or his scouts see him. And so they go into a cave and they go deep inside this cave. Lo and behold, Saul goes in that cave to use the bathroom. The men said, This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. You see what the men are saying? I mean, look, I don't want to beg this point, but you're probably no more vulnerable when you're in the restroom. That may be the most vulnerable you ever are. And apparently, he had to really, because, David's going to cut off part of his a corner off of his cloak, which means that Saul, for the most part, had to get really undressed to go to the bathroom, so you can imagine what he had to go to the bathroom for. So here is this guy, he's going to the bathroom in this cave. David's in the back of the cave, unbeknownst to him. Saul wants to kill David, and so his men say, look, this is great. God has given your enemies in your hand. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. That's all he did. And again, in my mind, the way he could do that without being noticed is that Saul had taken his outer garments off. Verse 5. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken. Now I feel for David here. Have you ever had somebody who just mistreats you over and over and over and over again, that difficult person in your life, and then you do one thing back and then you feel bad about it? Like the difficult person never feels guilty about anything. But now you're feeling guilty. So David feels guilty that he cut off part of Saul's robe. He said this to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way. Now let's stop right there and point out the first two lessons on dealing with difficult people from those verses. First, when dealing with difficult people, don't listen to bad advice. I mean, David's friends and his colleagues were saying, hey, this is your opportunity to get rid of that difficult person. But that was bad advice. And sometimes, you'll talk to somebody else about your difficult person, and those friends will tell you things that you should do, and it's just bad advice. Well, they did this to you. Why don't you do this back to them? You just can't let them get away with that. And they give you bad advice. And so you got to be careful. When it comes to difficult people, don't listen to bad advice, because that may make things worse. Second of all, do listen to your conscience. I mean, David went up and he cut the part of the robe off, and then immediately his conscience started bothering him. And so listen to your conscience, especially if your conscience is in tune with God. Your conscience could, not always, but your conscience could be the voice of the Holy Spirit directing you and telling you what to do and not do. So in other words, you got to pray about this difficult person. So don't listen to bad advice. Do listen to your conscience. Let's continue reading. Verse 8. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord, the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Wow. Notice the respect that David gave Saul by how he addressed Saul. Even though this was a difficult person, he still saw Saul as anointed by God. Your difficult person, no matter how difficult they are, have still been created in the image of God and deserve respect, even if they haven't shown you respect. I mean, Jesus says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so if you want people to show you respect, guess what? You got to show them respect. This brings up a third lesson. Lovingly confront the difficult person. David went out and showed respect, but yet he got Saul's attention, and now he's going to confront Saul. Look at verse 9. David said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift my hand against my master because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me. And may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds. In other words, Hurt people hurt people. From evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. And so you have to lovingly confront the difficult person. However, when you lovingly confront that person, you should do so with first respect. You see David showing respect. So you confront with respect. You confront with honesty. Saul, this is what's going on. But then you also confront by expressing your feelings. And I'm sure you've heard this before. You express how what that person has done made you feel. Not criticizing them, but when you did this, this is how it made me feel. And so you express your feelings without being accusatory. Let's continue, verse 16. When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And Saul wept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly. You have just now told me of the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So David gave his oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. This is lesson 4. When you confront, leave room for God to work. You cannot change people. Only God can do that. Furthermore, you are not responsible for how people respond to your loving confrontation. And you are not responsible for the reason somebody doesn't like you. It's not your fault. So you leave room for God to work. And this leads us to the last 2 lessons, which are extremely difficult. I think you kind of get a hint of what's going to happen in that last verse, verse 22, where Saul returned home, but David, they went up to a stronghold. There was something in David that still said, "I don't trust Saul. I forgive him. I don't want to kill him, but I'm not ready to go back home. We better go back into hiding. He knows where this cave is, so let's go to another stronghold." Even though Saul had admitted he was wrong and basically apologized. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 26. Chapter 26 begins very similar to chapter 24. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding on the hill of Hekelah, which faces Jeshimon?" So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 chosen men of Israel to search there for David. This peace didn't last very long. Once again, now Saul takes his 3,000 men and he's going to go find David to kill him. Now, here's what chapter 26 says. We won't read it. I'll just tell the story. So they go and they're looking for David, and then they get to this place and they set up camp. And Saul is asleep inside the camp. And David asked 2 of his men which of those 2 wanted to go with him into the camp. I don't know if it was to confront David. The men thought it was to kill David. To kill Saul or to confront Saul. One of the men volunteers, and so they creep into the camp. The Bible says that the reason they were able to do this is because God caused all the men to fall into a deep sleep. So they sneak into the camp. They go right up to where Saul is sleeping. David's friend said, "Once again, God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Let me pin him to the ground. And David says, no, you're not going to kill God's anointed. And so this time, instead of cutting something off, a piece of clothing, they took Saul's spear and his water jug, which were, the Bible tells us they were right by Saul's head. And so David takes the spear and the water jug, and they sneak back out of camp. Once they get outside of camp, David yells again, Saul! Wakes Saul up. He has a similar confrontation. Once again, God has told me, has given you to my hand, but instead of killing you because I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed, look, where are your spear and your water jug? Saul recognizes they're gone. David holds them up. Saul once again realizes that David could have killed him, but he didn't. And so you have the same conversation. David, you're more righteous than I. You're going to have the kingdom. Please forgive me and all that stuff. It happened again. And so here's the two difficult lessons. When you have a difficult person and you confront them, don't set your expectations too high. Have you played the game in your head? Okay, I need to talk to so-and-so, and here's what I'm going to say, and then I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to say this. And they're just going to immediately admit they were wrong, and the relationship's going to be healed, and everything will be better. And we set our expectations too high, and we go in humbly with good intentions and confront, and the person either says, I'm sorry, but then does the same thing again later, or they just do the exact opposite of what you thought they were going to do. So don't set your expectations too high. If you do, they will be disappointed. You still may need to confront, but just realize reality may be they're not ready to hear it yet. So you have to be willing to confront your difficult person more than once. Maybe it takes several times, but you confront them.